Well, good morning. Let's get started on our masterclass. As Nadia said, we're going to be talking to you this morning about crisis communications, leading through the chaos, and focusing on regrowth. So good morning, everyone. I am Nicole DeMeo, and I am here with my business partner, Jeanine Moss. I'm a consulting chief marketing officer and have a very extensive background in communications and marketing. I'm also a partner in a venture capital fund, Andra Capital. And what a lot of you may not know about me and realize is that I also have a background in turnarounds and crisis communications. So I'm joined by Jeanine Moss, who is a brand marketer and communications executive, and she's a very deep crisis expert. So Jeanine and I have worked together on major crises like the September 11th terrorist attacks and the September 11th Fund, on Hurricane Katrina relief for the American Red Cross. And we, in that capacity, were running the communications desk. We've worked on a number of natural disasters, business and financial crises and turndowns, M&A events like selling Next back to Apple and bringing Steve Jobs back. So we've worked with a lot of enterprises, startups, and nonprofits on some of the biggest crises of our times. Um, we about a month ago, we were going along and we were working on our brand strategy and positioning and messaging for clients, go-to-market strategies, whatnot. And then, of course, just 3 weeks ago, the world did a 180-degree turn. And that's when it hit us, kind of like it did during the September 11th tragedy, that we needed to step up and help and serve. And so we created Outfront Solutions. That's our business where we're working shoulder to shoulder with business leaders like you all. And we're providing marketing and communications programs that foster resilience and continuity and help you with regrowth. So no matter what the crisis is that you may be facing, we want to help you establish trust and loyalty across your multiple stakeholder groups. So based on all of that experience, we're going to today share with you some of our thinking, our processes, our philosophies and frameworks to help you navigate the situation. And we just want to say that right now you're probably all feeling a little bit off or iffy. And the hardest thing is not having a lot of information or some uncertainty. But as business leaders, we're here to step alongside of you, to provide you with information, and to help you feel more control of the situation. So we're going to help with a lot of the decision making that you're facing right now. So without further ado, let's jump into the presentation, and I'm going to hand it off to my business partner, Jeanine Moss, and you can hear her.
Hi, everybody. I love this quote because it points to the fact that even in the face of a huge recession, Sam Walton decided he wasn't going to accept what it was dishing out. And he was going to stay in control. And that is probably one of the biggest issues that you're facing now is what can you control in this face of uncertainty? And you can't control the crisis, but you absolutely can control your reaction to it, which is a principle I'm sure we've all experienced. So the question is, how do you do it? How do you take back control? What actions can you take? And what are the best possible outcomes for yourself, your company, your family, your stakeholders, which are extensive. We'll talk more about that. So these are the ways from a communications perspective we think about taking control. One is by taking a look at the situation and really analyzing it, boots on the ground, knowing your stakeholders and what they're experiencing. And when you gather all the facts and how you interpret them uniquely for your business is your first, point of control. The response plan, your decisions having to do with how you're going to address it, right? Your approach to it, your messaging, everything. The response plan is totally under your control. And one of the big things to think about throughout this crisis is the customer experience across all touch points, because all of your owned, earned, paid media that you are influencing is under your control. And how your customers think about you is totally up to you and what they think about in regard to yourself. You can control your messaging, as I just said, how you say it, where you say it. It makes a huge difference now, and in the long term, people are really listening right now and paying attention to who's doing and saying what. Collaboration is a gigantic tool for you. Pulling people together, creating community, finding your partner, supporting each other, figuring out how to do things. You don't have to know everything yourself, but pulling together a team is a gigantic advantage for you right now. And one of the things we're going to talk about a little later in this webinar is how you help, how you show up for this crisis will never be forgotten. So now I'm going to hand it back to Nicole to go over the agenda for today.
So what we're going to be covering today is just a few more details and facts around the COVID-19 situation. We're going to jump into the first step that everyone should be taking right now, which is discovery. So in a crisis, everything depends on information and facts, and that will be the backbone of your crisis communications program. We're going to talk about creating a plan. So we will provide a template for you. And if you get in touch with us, we're happy to give you an outline for that crisis communications plan, but we'll be giving you a lot of tips for your plan during the duration of this webinar. We're going to be talking about messaging. Messaging is crucial, and you're going to be doing this over the coming weeks quite extensively. So we're going to talk a lot more about communications frameworks and addressing some of the outstanding questions. And since you're at home and you're being bombarded by messaging, we're going to talk about some of the best practices, some of the ways that we see people are doing communications rather skillfully right now, or maybe not so skillfully. And then we're going to show you some examples and hope to inspire you with some compassionate creativity. That's what some brands, companies, and organizations are doing to give back during this time to their stakeholders. So let's talk a little bit about the COVID-19 situation. So in the COVID-19 situation, this is a study that was done by McKinsey. And all I want to point out here is that on the left side, they're talking about a boiled down scenario where the virus is spreading, but they believe this will be a delayed recovery, meaning we won't see relief until Q4 of 2020. So in this scenario, the virus is fairly contained because of the public health policies. It's seasonal, and consumer spending resumes around the end of the year. On the right side, we see a little bit more dramatic scenario where recovery doesn't happen until Q2 2021. So this means that consumer spending is retracted quite significantly, maybe similar to how everything turned out in the 2008-2009 recession and crisis. So the bottom line is whatever scenario plays out, or even if new ones emerge, we should be planning to address this crisis for the remainder of 2020. So let's look at some more market considerations. So everyone wants, sorry, 1 second. Okay. This is a little bit more by Bain and Company around the financial crisis and what people should be aware of and considering. And we're not going to go at length into this because I'm sure you've seen a ton of reports, but basically investing now could absolutely improve and provide better returns later, whereas if you were investing during an upcycle. As you can imagine, it's more likely that we'll see a number of defaults and bankruptcies during this time. Now is a really important time to look to your management teams to make sure that they have the right skills and experience to pivot during this time. And you want to get your plans together for the various scenarios. Scenario planning is really important right now. Um, and you'll need to get creative with your due diligence along the way. So now I'm going to hand it back over to Jeanine, who's going to talk to us a little bit more about the discovery process.
So I mentioned discovery a little bit earlier, and it's quite a lot like what lawyers do. We do the same thing in marketing communications and crisis communications. You have to conduct discovery by gathering all the known facts about a situation, the event. I mentioned stakeholders, and the goal is to understand how they're feeling so that you can communicate with them effectively, what they're facing, and avoid being ambushed by information that you don't know. So you're going to be making your case for your crisis response, essentially. So the elements of discovery include understanding the situation, as we're saying, and as you know, with the COVID-19 situation, it's changing all the time. So you have to be able to pivot quickly. You have to align your organization goals and values. You know what you're trying to achieve. You know what the imperatives are to stay open, say, sustain your business. So those have to be mapped to your plan. How are you going to do that? So you also, speaking of mapping, you really want to plot out the course, where you are today, where you want to be, and what are the steps that it's going to take to get there. And you want to pay attention to the competitive response because you're in a competitive environment, and everyone's response matters. Also, you don't want to duplicate efforts. If you end up doing something philanthropic, be additive, don't be duplicative. And defining the best role for you and your organization and your stakeholders to play. There's a huge value in playing a role in addressing this crisis. It helps everyone, you, your company, your stakeholders, everybody feels better when they're participating in the solution. And then finally, the last, you can't emphasize enough how often, how much you have to stay in touch with the news, because we're all looking at bringing people back now. So how's that going to happen? What are you going to do? So now let's talk about the stakeholders and how to think about them. So a lot of people think about stakeholders as being customers and employees and they're done. No, that's not the case. You have a whole ecosystem to your business, and probably everyone needs to hear from you in that ecosystem. And part of the reason for that is that you're all going to come out the other side of this, and people need to know who you were, what you did, how you did it. I'll just give you a brief example. There's a global apparel company that we're working with, and they originally got in touch with us and they said, hey, I want to just communicate with my employees. I'm going to tell them we're going to be cutting their salaries by 25%. And we said, wait, step back. Let's look at this whole situation, where we are now, where we think this thing is going. What are the impacts across all of your groups, right? And their customers are huge retailers. And as we know now and suspected then, they closed. And so they can't sell the products of this apparel company, right? And so meanwhile, the warehouse is totally full. They've got shipments on the sea coming in to the warehouse. Where they're going to put those goods. So they needed to deal with all of that supply chain. They weren't going to order more goods. So there's their vendor issue. And as you know, vendors are hard to find, good ones. So therefore, keeping your vendors with you, keeping your warehousing, apprised of what's going on. So we looked at the whole situation. We created a communications plan, and now they then realize the impact of their employees, and full circle, they're back to a different strategy with their employees. So that's just to illustrate how important this whole ecosystem is and how you should communicate across the whole thing. And remember that quote about it's the economy, stupid? Well, it's not. It's people. who matter the most, and they always do. And we wouldn't normally say it, except for the communications that we're seeing coming across our desk that look totally tone deaf, don't recognize that there's real people out there with real concerns who don't really necessarily care what you're talking about unless you've related it specifically to them. So the next time you are asked to review a piece of communications going out during this time, take a look and say, wait a second, does this put people first? And if it does, great. If not, don't approve it, go back to the drawing board. Now let's talk about planning a little bit with Nicole.
Great. Yeah. Now we're going to talk about your plan, and we're going to reflect on some of the questions also that people are asking. So with the plan, we are offering that if you send us a message, we're happy to send you a crisis plan outline. So we've provided our contact information at the beginning and end of this presentation. We're absolutely happy to send you a crisis plan. And what's in that is kind of a quick start guide, right? It takes you through what we've been talking about, the importance of discovery, and your preparedness, and outlining all these different elements that can help you each step of the way. Now, we realize it's a little bit like building a plane while flying, but still at this point in the crisis, and we'll talk about the crisis life cycle later, it's absolutely still worth creating a crisis communications plan and updating that and using it as your guide as you move through this situation. So let's talk about
Can I add one thing, which is that you are creating standard operating procedures, new ones probably in your business. Grab those and put them in a binder. Those are going to be the basis of a crisis plan going forward. Back to you, Nicole.
Actually, back to you, because we're going to talk about the stages of crisis now.
Okay, great. Okay, so Nicole and I developed this tool from our experience in crisis because how you communicate at each stage of the crisis changes. So I just want to mention the early warning stage because that's the part that a lot of people ignore, right? You get a whiff of something coming, you really don't want to deal with it, but I can tell you that every time in a crisis where I've ignored the early warning system messages, it's not worked out, and it's cost me a lot more time on the back end. So for example, the first case of COVID-19 in the US was January 20th. Some companies were already ahead of this thing. Like there's a company, a grocer in Texas called HEB, and they were already ready. They are really known for being stocked after a crisis, and they have their curbside delivery, their senior hours, they're all in place already. So can't emphasize that enough. But let's talk about escalation, because we're kind of in this weird phase right now where it's sort of escalating, maybe it's plateauing, but it's a time now that we're in, we call it the escalation phase, is when you don't know who's affected, how many people are affected, what we're facing, how the world's going to change, how we're getting back to work, a lot of uncertainty. During that time, you're going to want to be reassuring, you're going to want to be informative, and we're going to talk about a framework for looking at those communications during that time. As the crisis decreases and starts going, and we're praying that that's soon, and it's plateauing, you're going to start being able to add new kinds of communications. But as you well know, with this COVID-19 situation, it may come back. So in your scenario planning, think about, how do I communicate? What if it does come back? Is it really a decrease, or are we still sort of in that really more high anxiety phase? I don't know if you remember the Gulf War, but we declared victory very early, too early in the Gulf War. So here's a little tip for you. Don't speculate about when it's going to happen. Things are going to happen. If you don't know concretely that you're going to do something or something's happening, then don't put it into your messaging. When you stabilize, things are going back to normal, right? Now you can you can kind of count on some of the information you'll have, for, some period of time. That's hard to do right now. But at that point, you're going to really be focusing on back to business and how do you do it? And what do you have to tell your stakeholders? Do they know how to socially distance? Have you marked it? Have you taught them how to use their PPEs? There's going to be a lot of stuff that goes on in that stabilization phase that's going to require you to communicate with your folks. As recovery happens, this is your real opportunity to address that old adage about never let a good crisis go to waste, because people are going to be highly attuned to messaging, but not as anxious. And it's your opportunity to expand awareness about other things that you want them to know about. I'll give you an example from the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. I was heading up tourism promotion for New York City at the time. And the city was open, but the center had been bombed, and worldwide people were canceling their trips to New York. So we needed to let people know about geography. So we issued a release that said, hey, we've got this thing called Lower Manhattan. In Lower Manhattan, there's all these sites and attractions, which, by the way, people didn't know about then. And look at all the people who are attending them. So we got to do two things: inform people about the sites and attractions in Lower Manhattan, and also reassure them that people were going, so everything was open. So think creatively during that recovery phase. And by the way, prepare for that now, because it's going to happen. You will have this opportunity. And finally, we all are looking forward to this cultural shift. Gonna happen. And we can already see things like the Zoom meeting, right, that are going to be prevalent. So start thinking now about what that means to your future. I'm sure you're starting to. And just a moment more on the cultural shift. So there's going to be new competitors. Consumer attitudes are going to change. Our behaviors are changing and will stay changed. And so right now you're thinking about the resilience and continuity, but soon you'll be thinking about growth. And I'm sure you're thinking about sustenance as well. So, as leaders, we always have to look ahead. And so that's what this webinar is about. We want to try to help you do that. So I'm going to hand it back to Nicole to share some of the questions that we've been getting from people about planning, et cetera. Nicole?
Yeah, thanks, Jeanine. We've been talking to a lot of people on the ground. We've been providing these webinars and master classes for a number of weeks now since we went into this global pandemic and crisis. And a lot of the same consistent questions have come up. So what we thought we'd do is we would focus on those questions and provide you some answers here. So for the first one thing people are talking about is, should they keep funds in their marketing budget? And what, if anything, should they focus their marketing budget on right now? Jeanine, do you want to take that?
Sure. There's a lot of people who are just taking a sledgehammer to their marketing budget right now. Whoop, it's a big line item. Let's just get rid of it, right? And we're sympathetic to the need to conserve funds, but now is not the time to get rid of all of those marketing funds. You need them for a variety of things. And for one thing, there's a lot of studies out there that go back like 100 years about advertising effectiveness during big depressions and recessions, and they show that companies that increase sales and increase their spend during this time, increase their sales now, and also increase their market share after the financial event. So an example of that is in the 1900s, Post cereal was the category leader. And then the Depression came along, and immediately Post just they sledgehammered their whole budget, gone. But Kellogg's increased it. They actually increased their budget, and they launched Rice Krispies. So they came out the other side with Kellogg's as the market leader, and it stayed that way ever since. So if you slash your budget, you're going to be playing catch up with competitors who took Sam Walton's advice. For example, you'll lose current and future sales. You'll risk losing your best customers. And by the way, those need to be a focus right now. I'll talk about that later, to competitors who are going to be looking at them as their best customers. And you're going to lose your share of voice, which ultimately is share of market. So communicating frequently right now is actually the best thing you can do to position yourself for the future. And your budget has a lot of things in it besides advertising, which, as important as that is, to be used across owned, earned, paid, and social medias. So the key thing now is to focus on your core customers, markets, products, and services. If you have to trim the fat, trim it from the poorest producers. Focus on the big producing things. Narrow your focus down right now, but make sure that you remain part of the conversation and
Yeah.
use a scalpel. Nicole?
Yeah, very much so. So another question that comes up is it an option to not do anything at all? What happens if people don't communicate during this time? Jeanine, you want to take that?
Yeah, we all know that doing nothing is also an action, but the probably best thing to think about is that nature abhors a vacuum. And it's going to get filled. So if you're not filling that vacuum, then your employers, your customers, your vendors, and society writ large is. So what creates the most anxiety is anticipation, the unknown, imagining what your response is, imagining what you're going to do versus what you're actually doing. So you want to quell that kind of speculation, that kind of rampant anxiety with real facts and information. And these are the facts you created in your discovery efforts. So there they are. You'll have them. So use your advertising and your marketing budget and ramp up communications to fill that void and build relationships should be one of your major goals during this time. Nicole, want to talk about messaging?
Yes, very much so. So, we've been discussing what you say is hugely important right now. So, let's share some messaging tips. So, this is a communications framework that Jeanine and I created based on all of our years of experience. So, all your communications, right, during this crisis won't be directly about the crisis itself and how you're handling it. That would create all kinds of fatigue. But rather, this is a communications framework that will give you some ideas and other things you can do. So, in the early stages of a crisis, it's all about information. You tell people what you're doing to address the issue at hand, maybe talk about new hours, new operations, procedures, what have you. And we'll give you examples of how other companies are informing their stakeholders later in this webinar. You can also educate in these early phases. But frankly, educating people across the entire crisis spectrum is always going to be a good thing to go with. You may be explaining more about your products and services, how they fit in the world now, telling people about processes behind your business. And all of this is very critical for the future. During this time, you can reassure people and you can let them know what you're willing to do to step up and help. We've got great examples of how companies are reassuring their stakeholders, and this is just a really great uh, process to go through and exercise and maybe habit to get into as you continue to communicate to your stakeholders. Next, amplifying messages throughout this crisis is something that everyone is doing. So the most important thing here is to know your source. So if you're amplifying others' messages, make sure that you're not spreading rumors. Make sure you're sharing information that's verifiable. And that really helps people. So this is really your responsibility as a leader. And by the way, one of our favorite places to check facts is Snopes. That's snopes.com. So we recommend that you really are diligent about checking facts before you're amplifying them. And crises bring us together. So it's a natural time to create community and foster collaboration. And so by bringing people close, you're making them feel like they're part of the solution. And Like right now, Jeanine and I feel good about helping people through this situation. So next, we want to share a little bit about the communications do's and don'ts. On the do side, the key is to think. And this is a great filter that works for all communications. It's something that people from Socrates to Buddhists have used and believed in as they filter their communications along the way. So T is for true, H is for helpful, I is for inspiring, N is for necessary, and K is for kind. So putting your communications through that think filter. On the don't side, we already mentioned a little bit about don't include something that isn't fact. So don't speculate. Of course, don't be negative, don't be blaming, nor don't minimize the situation. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is to not be defensive, but that's also really important. If you're a leader, you're probably being blamed for something. So, especially when anxiety is rampant. So, just be careful about your reactions here and try not to be defensive. And these are ways that you can bring in your deep breathing, bring in meditation, whatever it is that helps you navigate through a situation. But being defensive is something you want to avoid as much as humanly possible. And we also recommend that you're not lighthearted or overly optimistic when people are hurting. So, in the end, you want to be warm, you want to be amusing, you want to, above all, be sensitive. So, next we have another question. So, a lot of people are wondering, what can they say that is reassuring during this time when they don't even know exactly what's going to happen next. So, Jeanine, maybe you can share with us, what should people be saying during this time?
Yeah. It's a hard one because you can't always tell people what they want to hear, right? That they're going to keep their jobs, that they're going to get full pay. So, how do you go about talking to them, as I guess the question that we're getting. And so, first of all, you got to be honest and straightforward at all times, because the trust that you earn now is going to last far longer than this crisis will. You'll come out so much better on the other side. And don't ever forget to express compassion, or pretend that something isn't happening if it is. There are elephants in the room, and like we were talking about before about the abhorring of nature abhors a vacuum. Don't neglect to answer the issues that are out there. So what do you do if you have to tell people bad news, right? If you're uncertain, which is probably your most likely scenario right now, just let them know where you are. Let them know what your values are. Let them know that you value them as employees. Let's say I'm focusing on employees, but think about, be honest with them. Let them know if you don't have a timeline. Tell them you don't have a timeline, but communicate with them often and commit to that. So make whatever commitments you can in your communications right now, and address the elephants in the room, even to let people know that you're thinking about them too. That will give them a lot of comfort. You don't have to have the answers, but you have to let people know that you're on top of the situation. Nicole?
Yeah, so another question that we get very frequently is about how often should people be communicating in a time like this? So, Jeanine, you want to share some
Yeah,
knowledge?
communications cadence is something that all marketers and communicators are struggling with all the time. But now is the time for frequent communications. Pretty much have been talking about that. You can build off of what you know, but let's just get right into a couple recommendations. Employees are the closest to you. You're going to, and they're dependent upon you, and they're going to be the most focused on what you do, and you should be communicating with them all the time. Now, we're in this weird place of crisis. So it's not ramping up, sort of plateauing. Maybe the information is not changing as quickly. So whereas maybe before I don't know how often you communicated with them, but right now, I would be communicating with them at least 3 times a week. I would be updating them on the situation, what you're doing, what's happening within your ecosystem, how you're addressing what's on where you're going. So really ramp up your communications. Do it through either email, open door to HR, town halls. Use them all. You want to be connected now. Customers are also incredibly vital to your ecosystem. So let's say that you used to communicate once a week, about something. So keep up that cadence. You might want to include it. Don't always talk about the virus, as Nicole said. Talk about other attributes. And this is a good time to talk about your values and goals with your customers as well, and give them a peek behind the scenes about what you're actually doing to address it. So we talked about vendors and supply chain folks as well earlier. Again, treat them like valued members of your team, because they are. And I just also want to mention investors, because a lot of people don't necessarily have a regular communication with investors, and yet you want to be proactive. You don't want them to be reaching in to ask you what's going on. You want to be telling them. So think about creating a regular communication to your investors, updating them on your activity. That'll keep them with you, and also help you avoid having to deal with other issues later. So as long as your messages are valuable, don't just put out stuff to put it out. They have to be valuable along the lines of the communications framework. Communicate as often as you're capable of, given your resources. So Nicole?
Yeah. So a question that comes up very often is, people want to know, can they be selling right now? Can they be selling their products and services right now during a crisis? Jeanine, do you want to shed some light?
So this is a really two-part question, or two answers, right? If your product is useful right now during the COVID-19 crisis, you can communicate about it. The only key, and you can sell it. And a lot of people are doing free things as trials to get into sales. So this is a time to be creative and sensitive, as we were talking about before, but you can absolutely sell if you do it in the right spirit, right now, and you're relevant. If your product isn't relevant right now, then the question is back to what role are you going to play in the crisis? How can you be of service? How can you bring the resources of your organization and your stakeholders to bear? You'll be doing yourself and your stakeholders a huge favor by engaging them with ways of addressing the crisis, and you'll be doing something good that you'll be remembered for. I think the most critical thing now, though, is to step back and make sure that you're thinking of people and how they feel when you deliver these communications, and reflect an understanding of who they are, what their needs are right now, what they need to know from you, right? And to be true to yourself, your mission, goals, and brand personality. So let's talk about some best practices here.
Yeah, and we're going to do so a little bit quickly because we have about 10 minutes left.
Okay. So
So
Nicole, let's look at your inbox. I know we have some stuff from it.
yeah, so these are just some sample subject lines that we thought we'd bring your attention to because we thought that they were doing a good job. So the first one here is from BNY Mellon, and they're educating in this. They're letting us know, they're in my inbox 2 or 3 times a week, and they're letting us know, all kinds of valuable information. This is focused on managing, during the market's ups and downs. The next message is from Beta Brand, who sell apparel, and they tap into our reality because a lot of us are going from pajamas to yoga pants and just working the day that way. So they're kind of speaking our language. The next example is from a company by Bazaar Voice, and what they're doing is paying people to listen to their webinar, to their summit online. And it may sound like a high cost of acquisition, but if you back into it and you think about if they bring on just a few customers and they have an average check of $2,000 to $4,000, and that doesn't even include the lifetime value, that's a pretty good conversion. And I bet they even get, quite a few people for that campaign. So we thought that was a smart one. One less thing to worry about who doesn't appreciate a subject line like that? It's just relieving to hear. And that was a service, a new service being launched by TransferWise. Um, and there's so many more examples. Is a nice one from Heath Ceramics showing us about, talking to us about being at home. And this example from How Women Lead we thought was also quite excellent. It's really reflects on their mission, and it has urgency, and it really speaks to the moment. So training to lead during this time. So we have a few more examples we'll quickly show you. The next one is from Spirit Rock, which is a meditation center. And we just pointed this out because they did a good job of informing and educating. So going back to that communications framework that Jeanine and I told you about, it's really important to inform and educate along the way. We thought they did a good job in this. They're pointing to the most credible organizations in the World Health Organization and the CDC, and they deliver their message with compassion, or meta, as they say. The next example is Best Buy, and they're in my inbox a couple times a week, and they're doing a great job of selling. They kind of position themselves as if they're a service, like they're doing a service, but they're also selling. What they're doing is sharing their best practices. They're sharing that they care about their employees and their customers. They are reassuring. They're telling us about the fact that they have curbside pickup, and they're changing their processes to adapt to the times, and that they're there for us in our technology needs. And we also kind of love the fact that it's a female CEO. Jeanine, do you want to share a couple examples?
Yeah, this is a great one from Trade Station. And what they're doing here is two things. They're telling me that they care about my financial concerns because of my financial goals, which is why I'm there. But they also are asking me what are the new ideas? What can they do to help now? So they actually mounted a survey right now. I think it's an excellent technique. This is a vendor communications from Macy's, and I'll just tell you that they talked about how fiscally responsible they are, the cutbacks they're making, the salaries they're not going to get, and then they went to the heart of it, which is that they're extending the terms of their payment for goods and services to 120 days. They acknowledged that it affected their vendors, but they did it in a really humane, informative, important way. I think it's an excellent example. This was a tone deaf one, came right in the middle of this whole crisis, and it doesn't even allude to the crisis. It's talking about prioritizing sales enablement at a time when we don't even know how to sell, really. We're figuring it out. And what's unfortunate about this is they could have just recast this, because it's a tech platform that undoubtedly enables people to work from home. So it was a missed opportunity. Nicole, will you talk about some of the other cool things we're seeing out there?
Yeah, these are great examples of compassionate creativity. And we just wanted to share this. This was compiled by Burson Cohen Wolf, and they came up with, they saw 75 different examples of companies that are giving back to help their stakeholders through the pandemic. And we just pulled out a few to show you on this slide. And we are just hoping that maybe it's a little bit of creative inspiration for all of you, that maybe you can think of ideas on your own in ways that your organization is authentically suited to give back and maybe kind of make the world a little bit of a better place. So these are some really nice examples, and lots of things like free courses by LinkedIn. U-Haul is offering college students free storage. Zara, the international clothing manufacturer, is creating and distributing surgical masks because they have the capability to do so. So please think about some of these things. Think about maybe what you can do as an organization to make the world a better place.
Okay.
So we just want to kind of summarize what we've covered today. And we want to remind you that you can take control of how you react and how you help. And that all is in alignment with, how you guide your company and the people around you to hopefully, a better future. So just to recap, you start with discovery. So you want to do a deep dive on the situation around all your stakeholders. This will guide all of your actions. You want to create a plan and adapt it. As we move through this crisis, you'll have the foundation in a crisis plan outline, which you can ping us at Outfront Solutions, and we'll be happy to email to you. You want to lead effectively and be mindful that you really have a stage during this crisis. And so it's important to impart truthful and supportive information. You want to create messaging that maps to the feelings and beliefs and behaviors of your stakeholders. Um, you want to watch what other people do. Look at the best practices and craft your own messages based on what you're seeing out there and what's working. So you can be a part of the solution. You can take back control, and as a leader, you can do it. And we're always right here by your side should you want to turn to us and ask us some questions. So thank you so much for having us, Nadia, LATOKEN Blockchain Economic Forum. We're here to serve and step up alongside of the entrepreneurs and investors in the community, should there be anything that you want to address. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.